Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and today we're digging into my message from Sunday, which was the end of our series on fear. And we really wrestled on Sunday with what in our world is worth fearing. Over the past couple of weeks, we've talked about fears that are not worth it, and fears we overcome by the presence of God in our lives. But what does it mean for us to really have a fear that's worth it? And how is that fear the fear of the Lord? We're going to dig into a little bit more what that phrase means and how we've understood it, and just how we have seen it lived out in the lives of other people, those that really understand what is the fear of the Lord. So let's get into it. Yeah, I told when my sister turned 40 last week, and we were at her house on Saturday after I'd gotten the sermon written. And I was like, I'm telling a story about you in the sermon on Sunday. And she's like, what could you possibly be talking about? And I was like, well, we're talking about fear. And she's like, you're talking about worms, aren't you? And I was like, yep, yes, I am. So that has left an impact on our lives of how Aaron used to torment me with worms. But it took me a little bit to get this one under wraps and under control this week. I mean, even though I'm in the middle of a series or the end of a series, and that might have been part of the reason why, because you get to the end of the series and you kind of run out of juice or gas or whatever. And then also dealing with a topic like the fear of the Lord, it feels like one of those things that in the back of my head was, maybe this isn't as groundbreaking as I think it is. Maybe people are gonna be like, well, yeah, we know that, Pastor Clay, like we have that figured out. And so writing it was hard to be like, what new can I bring to a topic that is so discussed, But even on Sunday after church, I had someone say, I've been a Christian a long time, and I've struggled with what it means to fear God and what it means to fear the Lord, and how we're supposed to love God and serve God, but also fear God at the same time. And those things don't feel very compatible. And when you think of fear as like, ooh, scary fear, they're not compatible. But when you apply it in its proper context, then it's like, oh, okay. And so I just had to be okay in the writing process. I just had to be okay not covering new territory, if that makes sense. Like sometimes there isn't a new spin on everything. And then I remember, oh, wait, yeah, I'm a theology major in college and I have an MDiv, and like, this is really all I do. And so after the conversation on Sunday, I was like, okay, yeah, we needed that sermon. So we found good news in the midst of it, because we know God better, and we fear God appropriately, and we serve God more faithfully when those two things are true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked the explaining it as reverence, which I guess Solomon was explaining that, but still that really stood out to me, because I kind of agree. It's something weird that I've never really understood, so I'm glad you did it.
Yeah.
In that it really is not the God is scary, but he can do a whole lot of really cool things, and we should just be in awe of what he can do.
Yep. It's comforting to know that, like I went through on Sunday, like the people of God struggle with this too. Like there were times when they were afraid of God, and not with like the awe and the reverence. There was times when they were afraid, like phobia, fear. And just to know that we're not alone when we struggle with it, I think is really helpful sometimes, because like, you can think about a character in the Bible and be just kind of starstruck. I don't know if this happens to other people, but it happens to me, where I'm just like, how can you face what you face? How can you do what you do? How can this all be your life experience? And yet you're, holding firm to your faith in God when life around you is just falling apart. It's easy but it's comforting to know that the people of God struggled too. That they didn't have it all figured out, that they're just as much in a discipleship process as we all are, that get it wrong and have to think about it and chew on it and come back and say, oh, that was a bad choice, or that was a bad understanding, or, that kind of a thing. So.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think it's easy to be starstruck in it takes us a while that when we read this, when we read the Bible, that they all deal with the same stuff we do. And I think that's sometimes for us to understand.
Yep.
These great people who had an abundance of understanding of who God was, or who God is and who Jesus is,
Right.
they still struggle with all the stuff that we struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
So really, they're just like us. It's just we get to hear their stories.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's nice to have, the space and time in a sermon to really dig into what fear has meant and how fear has been understood and how that fear has evolved over time to the point where it is an awe and a respect and a reverence for God, because like you said, God can do so many cool things, and like God is powerful, and if you're on the wrong side of God, probably, that fear is appropriate. But, as we live out lives of faith that strive to cling to God as much as we can, that changes. That's where that shift comes in from fearing God as in like, ugh, or, fearing God as in like, that was really cool. So,
yeah. Yeah. Do you think some of that fear, though, comes from we want a certain outcome and God has a different plan? And
absolutely.
the plan is different. We don't like it. And so that scares us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We want God to operate like a short order cook, where we put in our menu, we put in our order during prayer, and God does exactly what we want every time. And if it's not right, we send it back. And but that's not how it works, because God is sovereign. That's not how it works, because God does have a will that is bigger than ours. And no matter how you want to talk about that, that's the reality of our lives, is that God does have a will for us to kind of going back to like Jeremiah 29, like God has a plan for us to prosper and benefit. And like, it may not look like it at the time, but there are definite ways in my own life where God has redeemed the fear that I once had. Even like I said on Sunday, like I said about the sermon on Sunday, I was having such a hard time writing it. But then when I was done, it was just like, oh God, thank you. Because that was not, not to be like falsely humble, but like, that was not me. That was the wisdom, like, the inspiration of God working through me, to bring that message.
Mm-hmm. So how often, I mean, you said you struggled with this one. Does that happen more often at the end of a series or at the beginning of a series?
I think the end of the series is tough because, it's like we've been going in this one direction for the last, 4 or 5 weeks. This was a 6-week sermon series on fear. So like we dealt with fear in a proper sense of like just what it means to have fear and how that affects our physiology and what's going on neurologically with our amygdala and the way that affect that part of our brain affects our bodies when fear happens. And then we talked about, different things that were not worth fearing. Fear of failure, fear of being alone, fear of other people, like people that are different than we are. Those are not worth it fears. And so it was not necessarily an idea of where to go next, because I knew where I wanted to take us in the sermon series, to be like, okay, these are the fears that are not worth it, and we combat those with the presence of God. But here's a fear worth it. Here's a fear worth holding on to. Here's a fear worth feeling if we're going to feel it in the right way, and so that feels easy when I say it out loud like that. But when you're in the midst of sermon planning, that's like, we've been going in the same direction for so long, and now we're going to take a very big step to the left by like, here's not worth it. Here's not worth it. Here's not worth it. Here's worth it. And I was like, is this going to be too big of a step for us to take? But I think it worked well enough. So, yeah.
Nice.
But then you start working on the next sermon series and you're just like, oh, I can't wait until this one comes. And you're just like, oh, I've got 2 weeks left on this other sermon series and I'm still working on materials for what's coming next. And I'm excited about what's coming next. And I just can't wait to get there. And, then you're just like, okay, focus on this one at a time. It's going to be okay. It's just, yeah. So.
Yep. We're terrible finishers, right?
Right.
We just want to get started on the next thing. If you looked at my basement, nothing's finished, but it's usable, and now I move on to the next thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of the same scenario where it's hard to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Yeah. To tie a nice bow on something as big as this. Yeah, I'm sure that's challenging.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, like this reminds me of some parishioners back in the Herrick Church. They were living in a house while building a house. Like it was on the same kind of the same home place, and so they were 20 feet from their new home. And they're just like, we're not going to move in until it's all the way done. We're not going to move in until it's all the way done. We're not going to move until it's all the way done. The second it got livable, they're just like, okay, cool, we're moving. Like, what happened to, and like to this day, like it's 2023, I left in 2020, the house wasn't done, and I don't think the house is done now. Like, we are terrible finishers, and the shiny and the new is exciting, and yeah, but it's important to see it through to the end. Whether that is, anything really. Like you ran a half marathon on Sunday. I'm sure, that last half of it had to have been like, oh, why am I doing this? But
well, actually, to be completely honest, the last half was awesome because the little side story, the marathon starts a half hour before the half marathon.
Yeah.
But we go the same route for like the first 8 miles.
Oh, okay.
And there's a sign that says take a left to go on the marathon, take a right to go on the half marathon. Well, I ran the marathon last year, and you have no idea how much relief I had at mile 8 when I could take a right and take the half marathon instead of the full marathon, because my goodness, it is so much easier. It is way less than half the effort to run a half marathon than it is for a full marathon. There is a point in the full marathon when all of your legs and respiratory and everything just stops working properly. Oh. And you still have miles and miles and miles to go. That doesn't happen if you're prepared for a half marathon. That does not happen. Right. Like you can pretty much run through the whole thing and you feel fine when you get done. And yeah, it's such a relief.
There you go. I did kind of chop off. This got cut during even the writing process, but I was even wrestling with should I even read both scriptures? Because I did Proverbs 1, and then I also did that passage from 2 Timothy. And like that passage is just such a powerful reminder of what the fear of the Lord can look like. And just, when we think about it properly, God did not give us a spirit of timidity. God does not want us to be afraid. God does not want us to live in total fear all of the time. God has given us a spirit of power. God has given us a spirit of confidence. And so when we properly apply the fear of the Lord, I really feel like we can live with that proper spirit in us. And that was so important for Timothy because he was a pastor in Ephesus, and things were not going great. And he was also young, and like having been a young pastor, I'm no longer a young pastor, but it's fine. But having been a young pastor, I remember those moments of being afraid and being terrified and being like, the moment is too big for someone like me. This is not where we should be in life. Like in like a previous version of the sermon actually included a story. We had a member of the church in Brookings that was 106. And her mind was as sharp as a tack, but her hearing was gone. And so you either had to write it down or shout. And I went to visit her. We had a great time and a great conversation, and just, I think everything went, as far as I could tell, everything went well. But her home health aide pulled me aside and she's like, so who are you? And I was like, well, I'm the associate pastor at Brookings First. And she's like, oh, the associate. Next time, bring the real pastor.
Are you kidding?
Nope. Yeah. So like living with a spirit of timidity could have been the end result of that. But I doubled down. I'm a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but I doubled down and like I visited her like 3 more times that month and just be like, nope, still the fake pastor. It's fine. And then like he was getting ready to turn 107, and someone asked her, what do you want for your 107th birthday? And she said, I don't want to. That's what I want for my 107th birthday. I don't want to have one. And I swear to God, if I'm lying, I'm dying. She passed away at 106 years, 364 days. She died the day before her birthday. And like, I got to be a part of her funeral. And just like, that could have been a moment where that fear could have been too much for me. And I would have just, as an associate pastor, I had the right to just say, Rich, I really think like you need to do this. My senior pastor, I really think that you need to do this sermon or this funeral because the aide doesn't want me. I could have said that. That could have been a legitimate conversation that we had. But it was important for Rich to have help, because it was a big funeral and kind of a big deal, losing your oldest member like that. And just, yeah, it was, and then I could draw on some of those memories that I had with her as I'm addressing the family and the people of God assembled to celebrate her life. And yeah, when we have that spirit of timidity, it can lead us to, it can really lead us to fears that aren't worth it. And so I think that's really important that Paul said that to Timothy, as he's on his way out of this mortal life. Like this is when you look at the chronology of the letters of Paul, this is it. Like this is the last letter he wrote. Like he is on the verge of being poured out like a drink offering, is how he puts it, but he's on the verge of dying. And he doesn't admit to that. He still says, when you come visit me, bring my jacket because I'm cold. And, he had these expectations, but he knew his time on earth was coming to an end and wanted to encourage his friend one more time before that happened, and said, okay, even when I'm gone, because they meant so much to each other, even when I'm gone, do not let this fear control you, because that's not how God has made you to be. You have been given a spirit of power. You have been given a spirit of confidence. You have been given a spirit that is not afraid, and live into that truthfully and follow God faithfully.
Yeah. Well, even the lady who almost turned 107, for her to say, I don't want one for my 107th birthday. Talk about fear of God there. I mean,
right.
Talk about true reverence and confidence in what she
absolutely
believed.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool too.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah. She was pretty cool. But
to have, Gal, that's what I want. To be able to have that level of confidence and peace and knowing what lies ahead.
Yeah.
I don't want anything more at the end of my, you know what I mean? Like
at
the end of my life, that's what I want.
Yep.
To know that,
I feel the exact same way.
I'm going to the right place after this, and I'll see you there someday. You know what I mean? Like that's, yeah.
Yeah. What more could you want out of life than to die with that much confidence and that, God-given confidence? And just, like I said, her body was what was failing her. Her mind was sharp as a tack up until the very end. Obviously, that's what she said, as her birthday was as her final days were approaching. Like she understood the reality better than any of us. And just, it was interesting because that question was asked by one of my high school youth, who was working as a kind of doing a kind of a job shadow thing at the nursing home that she was at. And she came to me and she's like, Clay, I don't know what to do with what just happened. I need your help. I don't, and she just needed help to process through that, because she heard that and was afraid. But when you're a high schooler, you're a junior in high school, and the biggest thing that you're worried about is your boyfriend giving the right promposal, because that all happened like in the next week and a half or so.
Sure.
That's not where your brain is, and so yeah, my friend that was 106 could provide so much wisdom to that situation. Yeah.
So cool. Well, what's the next sermon series on?
Yeah, so actually we're taking a little bit of a break. We're taking a 1 week break from sermon series. So on Sunday, we're going to be digging into more of Paul's writing, Paul's letter to the Romans, where he talks about letting love be genuine and what that looks like for us. And so there are ways that we fake it until we make it, and there are ways where that is disingenuous and not helpful. And so Paul is instructing the church to not be like that, and to really, this is kind of the end of the book of Romans. It's really a big transitional statement to where Paul gets very, very practical and very, very advicey, and just says, this is how we should live in light of everything that's happened, because it's this big presentation of the gospel. In light of everything, this is how we should live. We should let our love be genuine. We should pray for those who persecute us. We should weep with those who weep and celebrate with those who celebrate, and just, live in peace. If it's at all possible, live in peace with those around us. And so that's going to be what we kind of unpack and tackle on Sunday. And then in 2 weeks, we're starting a new sermon series based on the life of Joseph from the Old Testament, and how we live a faith that is as steadfast as his, even when circumstances around us are troublesome.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's Cut for Time podcast. Join us again next week in person at 10 a.m. at church, online on YouTube, and then here for the podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.